We are. And a post-Hurricane Ian water quality dashboard, Dr. Miles Medina is going to present this, and it will be on a centralized web-based visualization dashboard that shows collaborative data collected by CHNEP and its members and partners, and it relates to the management plan to the public engagement action to expand the reach of education and engagement opportunities to new target audiences, and fish, wildlife, and habitat protection action, protect, restore, and monitor estuarine habits. And Dr. Miles Medina, who is with us remotely.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm Miles Medina from UF's Center for Coastal Solutions. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you once again today. So Jennifer asked me to talk about the water quality dashboard that Brandon Moody from Charlotte County and I put together in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian to, I think, one, coordinate, sampling efforts across all the different groups involved right after the hurricane. Which, of course, was a bit of a chaotic period, and also to disseminate, information, data about what was going on the ground and as close to real time as possible. So next slide. I want to just start off kind of on a personal note. I grew up in Miami, and as a kid, it seemed like we were dealing with hurricanes like every summer. And I was in middle school when Andrew hit in '92, really intense, powerful storm, pretty devastating. But one of the things that stood out, particularly around after Andrew but after hurricanes more generally, was just the kind of cooperation and feeling of community that would follow these hurricanes. I mean, neighbors, coworkers, friends, and family helping each other out. Sharing resources, giving each other rides, taking care of each other's kids and all this kind of thing. Even after Andrew, there was this benefit concert put on by Gloria Estefan, if you remember her, pretty popular in the '90s, at least in South Florida. And, it was not only like raising funding, but it was like a nice kind of cathartic, like, a party to contrast with all the sort of chaos and upheaval after the storm. And the reason I bring this up is I think the scientific response, from what I observed after Ian, it kind of reminded me of this cooperation, everything that emerged afterwards. So the dashboard was just, one part of that. That's what I'm going to focus on. But there really was a quick and impressive, I think, scientific response. So on the next slide, I have just a little bit of the timeline relevant for the dashboard. So, of course, Ian made landfall in Florida on the 28th of September. The next morning, CCS held a research response call with people across the university to try to mobilize personnel and equipment for the scientific response. And then a little over a week later, on October 7th, we coordinated the first in a series of weekly coordination calls with a variety of state and local partners. So we had estuary programs, SCCF, aquatic preserves, government agencies, universities, folks from counties. And, one thing was just to, I think, get everybody to see, to kind of share expertise and experience across the different people involved in the response. And coordinate, sampling and so on at a time when, of course, a lot of equipment and personnel are knocked offline. And one of the things that came out was Brandon Moody shared a dashboard that he had created, like a map, like Esri type dashboard, just to, keep track of where, I think at the time, where Charlotte County was doing sampling, and perhaps she was bringing in data from other folks as well. But, it was a map, and if you hovered over a point, it would tell you like what was collected, and when, in terms of sampling. And he said, it would be nice if we had another dashboard that, could actually visualize these data, have some charts and so on. So we started working together, sort of, it's just kind of like pro bono, a few extra hours each week just to get this up and running. And let's see on the next slide. I think the main goals were, one, to facilitate sampling across all these groups. So, we want to see if different folks are doing sampling, are there coverage gaps somewhere that other people could fill in? And then also to make provisional data available to partners as soon as possible. So later on, after we've been working on this dashboard for a little while, I realized this is really a unique use case. I mean, if you're like me, you think of water quality dashboards as a place to visualize and disseminate, highly vetted, quality controlled data. But here the emphasis was on speed and getting the information out to, folks like those of you on the call right now, scientists and managers and so on, to get that information out as soon as possible. What's going on the ground, and everybody kind of needs to know, have a clear picture of what's going on in real time as this dynamic situation unfolds. Of course, there are a couple challenges. As I said before, a lot of equipment and personnel are unavailable after Ian, so just like any other major event. And the labs were sort of backed up. I think this was a pretty serious bottleneck at some point, where between collecting a sample and actually having the data in hand, I think at some point at worst ran around like 2 weeks or a little bit more than that. So there were some challenges. And then in parallel, I just want to acknowledge again, Brandon Moody, set up the initial dashboard, an Esri type of map. And CHNEP was really leading the charge on coordinating sampling efforts across the different groups. There was a spreadsheet where people could put in where they were going to sample. There was a list of labs and sampling protocols maintained. And then there was also a map dashboard for sewer and septic overflows. All right, so on the next slide, we can take a look at a little screenshot of the dashboard that we developed. And it's still up right now, so I'll provide a link at the end if you want to check it out if you hadn't seen it before. With a caveat, this is like, it's really kind of a quick and dirty dashboard. Understandably, it was under the circumstances, the idea was to get something up that could be useful. Definitely not, at the level where I would be like, I would promote it as, super high quality and quality controlled and everything. I think, and I'll talk about this some more later, it may be worth further developing this and maintaining it into the future. But there are some issues that would need to be resolved and so on. Anyway, the way it works is on the top left, you see a few options there for the user. So you can select a location from the dropdown on the top left. You can specify an analyte. In this case, dissolved oxygen concentration is selected. And then there's a date range slider where you can adjust the start and end date that you want to display on the map. Right now, it's showing the entire date range, but you can also hit a play button and that will step through. If you have, let's say, like 1 week at the beginning of the range selected and you hit play, it'll kind of march through the dates and update the map at each step. And then, of course, the map is showing the locations of the data. So you can also, that's the preferred way to select a station or location is to click it on the map. That updates the time plot that's on the upper right. One issue that if we were to further develop this would be, it would be nice to have functionality where you can select multiple stations on the map, because many of these dots, as you imagine, just represent one sample. And so plotting one data point isn't really that useful. But, if you're interested in seeing what's going on in, Matlacha Pass or something, you could just lasso all those points and then have them visualized on the time plot. And the time plot has some cool functionality where you can kind of zoom in and, play with the axes and zoom into a certain time period or whatever. And then the histogram on the bottom operates a little bit independently, where for the selected analyte, in this case, dissolved oxygen concentration, it'll show the histogram for each week. And so the weeks are represented as dots directly beneath the plot. And you can hit the play button and it'll step through each week and adjust the histogram accordingly. So you can kind of see the distribution of data week to week as time goes on. Okay, yeah, let's look at the next slide. So as I said, there's plenty of room for improvement here. selecting multiple stations is a really important piece of functionality that I would like to add. There are some lingering data quality control issues. Even though the quality control that's, I think, required for this kind of use case where it's sharing provisional data, even though that level of quality control is pretty remedial, pretty basic, there are some issues that, do need to be resolved, like, longitudes should be negative, like -82 or whatever. And, dates need to be formatted correctly and all that. And there are some lingering issues in the data behind the dashboard. One other thing that I didn't get around to implementing, but that Brandon suggested early on was visualizing depth profiles. So, he was going out and collecting, for example, oxygen concentrations at different depths in the Peace River. And, having a plot where depth is on one of the axes would be really useful, and certainly something that we could implement. And then another bit of functionality that could maybe live on a different part of the dashboard would be mapping scheduled sampling trips across different agencies and partners to help coordinate sampling so that, monitoring gaps can be filled. So for example, if you're SCCF and you know that you're going to be going out sampling, next week at these particular locations, or, some general area, we could put that on a map, and then other people that are planning on sampling at next week as well can say, oh, well, there's coverage over there, why don't we go sample over here instead, where nobody is planning on going yet. So I think this could be really useful if there's interest. Okay, let's look at the next slide. So in terms of what went on with the water quality, of course, there's a distinction between just having the data and actually like rigorously analyzing it and doing some research. So that kind of analysis is still pending. Personally, I'm planning on doing some of that this year. I'm currently working on a trend analysis for the last 20 years for Charlotte Harbor, and especially the different CHNEP strata. And that will form the basis of, putting post-Ian conditions into context, like a historical baseline. And then we can also compare the post-Ian conditions to what occurred after other major disturbances, other hurricanes or El Nino events or similar things. So at this point, I don't think there's much that we can say with a lot of certainty about what happened, but I do have some general kind of observations from being on those weekly coordination calls and just handling the data. Oxygen and low oxygen levels were, of course, an issue. We had a lot of oxygen demand, hypoxia in different areas, and these appeared to persist for several weeks as the flood and the storm water drained off the landscape. Of course, as everyone's familiar with, we had fecal coliform, Vibrio, other bacteria at alarmingly high levels for quite a while. So there was the public health risk associated with that. Locally, I think an important question is to what extent the nutrient plumes that resulted from the storm may have triggered or exacerbated the red tide bloom that swept in from the Gulf. And of course, there were reports of fish kills. So all kind of interesting questions that will take some time to sort of investigate, but fortunately, we've got a good amount of data to look into these things. On the next slide, these are more kind of operational or like management level observations. So just like with any major disturbance event, there's often this kind of black box period because equipment and personnel are knocked offline. So the data are sparser than usual. But that being said, the collaborative effort here with coordinating monitoring, filling coverage gaps and monitoring, sharing resources and equipment among groups was really quick and impressive. And the dashboard was just one small part of that. The coordination calls I thought were just really insightful. I mean, we had old timers with decades of experience and context to help us, help everyone understand what was going on immediately after the storm. And we had a lot of variety of expertise, different kinds of biologists, from people that know seagrass or algae, bacteria, hydrologists and water quality people. kind of developing a shared understanding and shared messaging around what was going on. And the weekly coordination meetings ended, I want to say, I think it was like around November or maybe early December, just as the red tide bloom was starting to kick off. And one of the things that occurred to Christine and I was that, continuing, you have these cascading events, right? So there's a storm, and then there's a bloom that is, likely influenced or exacerbated by the storm. And understanding these, consistently through time, I think might require continued coordination and conversation to understand like the longer term or medium term impacts in which these things unfold. So the red tide bloom, I think, is a good example of that. And then this is my last slide. I think for further development, I think personally, the coordination calls, I mean, if I wonder if there's interest in the group and kind of keeping these going, maybe like having a standing meeting monthly. It was just really nice to have so much information shared by so many different experts and so on, and the emergence of this kind of common understanding of these complex issues. And I think, I mean, I think we all cringe at the idea of like more meetings, but if we had a standing meeting and people, join as their schedules allow, even if they don't attend every meeting, I think this kind of consortium of all the different groups could emerge that could be really beneficial. And likewise for the dashboard, as I said, it was kind of a quick and dirty implementation, somewhat useful, but could certainly be improved. I think if there's interest, further developing and maintaining this dashboard would potentially support, monitoring coordination across groups and kind of common understanding of current or very recent conditions under just normal circumstances. But it would also be in place when it's needed after, the next major event, whenever that happens. So it might be worth, if there's interest with the group, figuring out how we might fund and support something like that. And then finally, just here's my contact information on the next slide and the address for the post-Ian dashboard. And I didn't mention, by the way, if anybody's interested in the technical details, this is a dashboard that was implemented in CHNEP, and the graphs and stuff are using eCharts, which is a pretty cool, flexible way of plotting data. That's on the next slide. If we could advance one. Yep. Okay. So yeah, if there's time, I would love to have kind of feedback and discussion from the group and see if there's any interest in sort of maintaining this kind of different type of water quality dashboard based on, with an emphasis on disseminating the information, not necessarily to the public, but, to people, scientists and managers and so on. And as close to real time as possible, as opposed to the more typical, highly vetted QC'd water quality dashboard. So thanks for your time, and I look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Medina. Questions, comments, discussion?
So I'll speak on behalf of Brandon, that he would definitely be interested in continuing the conversation and building this out for the future. I had a conversation with Brandon just after the storm, within a day of the storm. He works for me, and he was telling me what he was thinking and thinking about with this group coming together, and it really it seemed to be something that was definitely missing in our emergency response, something that the area needs. And if I remember rightly, I think he told me it's something that really hadn't been done before to this scale. So I think ongoing communication and discussion and building this in and building that dashboard up as we move forward would be a great thing.
I think it could actually contribute to the types of collaborative approaches that would be needed. I can, unless you're part of the DEP or Fish and Wildlife, the law enforcement officers out there at the boat docks are going to tell you, well, you can't go out in the water because we don't know what's in that water yet. So if you're part of the team that is going to go out and help tell him what's in the water, this could facilitate organizing that team, perhaps. So that's my thought, going back to Laura's comment earlier about one of the rationales for doing sampling right after an event and doing a robust effort.
Yeah, I would just add like a couple thoughts just from our direct experience working with all the different entities, is that, you know, there were logistical challenges. We didn't, you know, the government has a role in recovery, but as far as being nimble and being able to be reactive, you know, there are sometimes challenges. And so we, you know, really working with like the universities and nonprofits like CHNEP, we even reached out to the Conservancy of Southwest Florida and had them pick up some of the lab processing costs. You know, we had to think outside the box and engage every type of resource and partner we could, you know, assemble to pull this off. And this dashboard wouldn't be possible had not everyone chipped in what they could and got that data. That was the foundation of even having this dashboard, but it was such a Herculean task to do that. And some communities, understandably, I mean, public health and safety had to come first. And so, you know, labs were diverted to public water supply. People were diverted to public water supply. It was understandable, but that's when we needed to like reach outside even our region to try to engage UF and others to come in and bring manpower and equipment. And because this whole, you know, this was a scale of an event that we really hadn't seen. You know, we had Charlie, very focused, very devastating. The whole storm of Charlie could fit inside the eye of Ian. It was so much larger. And so the path, you know, an hour north to an hour south, everything was devastated. So we were really struggling to figure out, well, who can help us if we're all in the same boat that's sinking, you know, together. But I think that, you know, the CHNEP is committed, as you all are aware, we have a separate website called the CHNEP Water Atlas. And this year we're doing a major overhaul. It's taken a couple of years to do all the behind the scenes work to do a total reworking of the Water Atlas, where we are working very closely with University of Florida and others to introduce new features, new analytical tools. So we really want to make sure we get all publicly accessible data on there, and we're going to have all sorts of new interactive GIS maps, and it'll be by water body. So it'll be organized very user-friendly, where if you're looking at Charlotte Harbor or Estero Bay, you're going to go there and there's going to be 4 interactive mappers. One's water quality, one's hydrology, one's fish and wildlife habitat, and one is climate change data. And then on top of that, there's going to be a dashboard of looking at the most recent water quality data that is being input from every source and kind of measuring that against established thresholds, water body by water body. So each water body obviously has different water quality standards and things of that nature. So anyway, long story short is to say that I see that there is a place for this to be woven into that. And the fundamental thing that I see as the linchpin coming out of this is getting the data post-event. Because I think we'll have the tools to house the data and to analyze the data, but what we aren't yet prepared for is another storm that is of the caliber of Ian. And how do we pull together the people, the equipment, and, you know, the labs were maxed out. We couldn't find labs to process. We had some samples, unfortunately, get spoiled and non-processed, which was very painful considering how much we went to get those samples, because there was no lab capacity. So we hit all sorts of constraints in getting the samples and processing those samples. But I think that to me is one of the things we would like to, you know, engage you all today to kind of think through how can we do better next go round, because it's certainly going to happen again.
I have a suggestion. I think to write a plan now as to what you're going to do then. Like, don't wait until after it happens. Write the plan now. I'm Shannonberg with FEMA mitigation. You know, think about what am I going to do now for that eventuality. You know, think about what's going to happen in the future. What are the alternatives, and come up with a variety of different scenarios and sort of make some plans in advance. Like pick you know, if you need a lab, get some kind of arrangement in advance.
Yes.
And get that paperwork in order. Identify who's going to do what and when and how. And that's really the name of the game, and then you start thinking about climate change and sea level rise and those kinds of things. And it gets even more complicated as time goes on, you know, so, you know, that might be something to think about, you know.
Yes, and I will say, just to respond to that very quickly, that emerged out of the technical advisory committee, the idea of forming a plan, but I think there was also the idea that we need also a plan B
Right.
for the plan,
Right.
because there were things, you know, if entity A commits to do it, but is unable, then what? Because that's kind of
Right.
what we were running into too, is that even people who normally would have been able to jump in and fulfill certain responsibilities suddenly found themselves unable to for one reason or another. So we didn't have necessarily a second line of action to pursue immediately. We had to kind of feel around for that. But I do think that is one of the things we heard out of the technical advisory committee.
Sort of like an operations plan, but, you know, like think about what's going to happen, what can we do and how can we do it, you know, and
Or continuity of operations plan, for that matter. If
that,
continuity of operations.
yeah, that's it.
Of your contingencies.
Right. Right.
Sounds like, I mean, it feeds into what Claire pointed out, which is working with the emergency managers and trying to integrate this environmental response element into the overall emergency response plans that are being developed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would echo that, because, you know, one of the things, and I have one of the teams that would have been out there being able to assist. However, per our operations plan, they were locked into other duties. We're not allowed to self-deploy. We can't send you supplies. We can't send you people. We can't send you boats unless it goes through our EOC. And that's because this isn't part of that. So we have to follow our protocols, even though we potentially could have been there to help.
Also,
It sounds like it's his suggestion, having the continued conversation. I mean, everything sounds like you're just.
I'd also maybe think about advocacy at a state level to make this something that is recognized and understood at state level as something that is not just in this region. You know, so this type of action plan, this after action plan, to provide suggestions to other locations that are going to get impacted. It's not just, you know, the Southwest Florida region that gets impacted.
Sounds great. We have good content suggestions coming out of this process for the resiliency planning efforts going on all over the place right now. And for the emergency plan updates that are likely to occur post Ian. Thank you, Dr. Medina. I hope you can stay on for the rest of the call. By way